There are moments in music history that feel frozen in time, moments where a voice so powerful, so raw, so achingly human cuts through the noise and touches something deep within the soul. For millions of gospel music fans across generations, that voice belonged to Russ Taff. But behind the soaring vocals that brought tears to eyes and hands to the heavens, behind the Grammy Awards and standing ovations, there was a man fighting a battle that no one could see. A battle so intense, so consuming, that it would eventually force him to make one of the most painful decisions of his life, walking away from the Gaither Vocal Band at the height of his influence. For decades, this departure remained shrouded in mystery, whispered about in church hallways and debated in online forums. The speculation ran wild, but the truth remained locked away, too painful, too personal, too real to share. Until now. At 75 years old, Russ Taff has decided that the time for silence is over. This is not just a story about gospel music. This is a story about the cost of perfection, the weight of expectation, and the courage it takes to choose healing over image, even when that choice might cost you everything. To truly understand what led to Russ Taff's departure from the Gaither Vocal Band, we need to travel back to where it all began, to the hills of Arkansas in 1953, where a boy was born into a world of fire and brimstone preaching and Pentecostal passion. Russ grew up as a preacher's kid, which sounds like a blessing until you understand what that really meant in his household. His father was a man of rigid expectations and harsh discipline that left scars Russ would carry for the rest of his life. In interviews over the years, Russ has spoken about the dysfunction that marked his childhood, the emotional abuse that made him feel like he was never quite good enough, never quite worthy. Church was supposed to be a sanctuary, but for young Russ, it often felt like a stage where he had to perform. And yet, even in that painful environment, something extraordinary was happening. Music became his refuge. When Russ sang, the pain that he couldn't express in words found its way out through melody, through the raw power of his voice that even as a child carried a depth and emotion that stopped people in their tracks. He wasn't just singing the songs, he was living them, pouring every ounce of his hurt and hope into every note. By the time Russ reached his 20s, he had already begun to make a name for himself in gospel music circles. In the mid-1970s, he received an invitation that would change his life forever. The Imperials, one of the most innovative and respected Christian music groups of that era, wanted him to be their lead singer. This wasn't just any opportunity, this was the big leagues. With the Imperials, he won Grammy Awards, Dove Awards, and the adoration of fans across the country. His stage presence was magnetic. When he performed, he became the music, his voice soaring to heights that seemed impossible, and then breaking with a vulnerability that made grown men weep. Audiences didn't just hear Russ Taff, they felt him. But even as the crowds grew larger and the accolades piled up, something dark was growing inside Russ. The insecurities planted in his childhood, the feeling of never being enough, these wounds had not healed. Success didn't fix them. If anything, the pressure of being in the spotlight made everything worse. He began to feel like a fraud, like he was playing a role rather than living an authentic life, and so he found a way to cope, a way to numb the pain. He started drinking. At first, it was just a little something to take the edge off, but addiction doesn't stay small. It grows in the darkness, feeding on shame and secrecy until it becomes something that controls you. After several successful years with the Imperials, Russ made the decision to pursue a solo career. His solo albums, particularly Walls of Glass and Metals, showcased a new level of artistic maturity. These weren't just collections of gospel standards, they were deeply personal works that reflected Russ's own journey, his own struggles with faith and doubt. Songs like I Cry and Praise the Lord weren't written from a place of triumphant certainty, they were written from the trenches, where faith and fear coexist. Fans connected with the vulnerability in a way that surprised even Russ himself. People wanted to hear from someone who understood what it felt like to struggle, to question, to fall and get back up again. His solo career brought him continued success, more awards and more opportunities, but it also brought more pressure and more reasons to hide the addiction that was slowly taking over his life. Throughout the 1980s and into the 90s, Russ continued to perform and record, but behind the scenes, his battle with alcoholism was intensifying. The shame was overwhelming. How could he, a man who sang about God's love every night, admit that he was struggling with something so stigmatized in the Christian community? So he stayed silent, and the silence nearly destroyed him. His marriage to Tori was tested in ways that would have broken most couples, but she stayed, refusing to give up on him even when he had given up on himself. Then came an opportunity that seemed like a gift from heaven. Bill Gaither, the legendary figure in gospel music whose influence and reach were unmatched, invited Russ to join the Gaither Vocal Band. This was more than just another gig. This was a chance to be part of something truly special. The Gaither Vocal Band was known for its impeccable harmonies, its deep spiritual themes, and its ability to connect with audiences on a profound level. For Russ, joining the group felt like coming home. The chemistry between him and the other members, including Guy Penrod, David Phelps, and of course Bill Gaither himself, was immediate and undeniable. When they sang together, magic happened. Their voices blended in ways that gave you chills, and their performances were nothing short of transcendent. Audiences loved seeing Russ with the Gaither Vocal Band, and his presence brought a new energy and depth to the group. For many fans, this was the perfect marriage of talent and purpose, and they assumed Russ would be with the Gaither Vocal Band for years to come. But what the audiences didn't see, what even some of his fellow band members didn't fully understand, was that Russ was dying inside. The pressure of performing at such a high level while battling addiction in secret was crushing him. Every performance felt like a lie. Every smile felt forced. Every word he sang about freedom and grace and God's love felt like an indictment because he knew he was living a double life. He would stand on stage, pouring his heart out through song, receiving standing ovations and heartfelt praise, and then he would retreat to his hotel room and drink himself into oblivion, desperate to escape the shame and self-hatred that consumed him. The weight of pretending became unbearable. Russ has since described those years as some of the darkest of his life, a time when he felt completely trapped with no way out. He couldn't keep going like this, but he also couldn't imagine stopping. Music was his identity, his purpose, the one thing he knew he was good at. Who would he be if he wasn't Russ Taff, the gospel singer? And yet, who was he becoming by continuing to live this lie? The breaking point came not with a dramatic scandal or public confrontation, but with a quiet realization that hit Russ like a ton of bricks. He realized that if he didn't get help, if he didn't step away and deal with his addiction, he was going to lose everything that truly mattered: his marriage, his faith, his sanity, and possibly his life. He knew that continuing with the Gaither Vocal Band in his current state wasn't just unsustainable, it was dishonest. It wasn't fair to Bill, to the other members, to the audiences who came to hear them sing, or to himself. He needed to stop performing and start healing. He needed to stop hiding and start being honest. He needed to step out of the spotlight and into the hard, painful work of recovery. And so, with a heart full of fear and sadness, Russ made the decision to leave the Gaither Vocal Band. This was not a decision he made lightly or quickly. He agonized over it, prayed about it, talked endlessly with Tori about it. He knew that leaving would raise questions, that people would speculate about what happened, that rumors would spread. But he also knew that staying would eventually destroy him, and he had to choose life even if that choice came with a cost. When Russ approached Bill Gaither about his decision to leave, he was met not with anger or judgment, but with compassion and understanding. Bill Gaither, who had seen many artists come and go over his long career, recognized that Russ was fighting a battle that required time and space away from the demands of touring and performing. There was no dramatic falling out, no bitter arguments, no burned bridges. Instead, there was a mutual respect and a shared understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go so they can find their way back to themselves. Bill and the other members of the Gaither Vocal Band supported Russ's decision, even as they grieved the loss of his presence in the group. They knew that his leaving was an act of courage, not cowardice, and they hoped and prayed that he would find the healing he so desperately needed. The years that followed Russ's departure from the Gaither Vocal Band were marked by intense struggle and profound transformation. Recovery from addiction is never a straight line, and Russ experienced setbacks and relapses along the way. But with Tori by his side, with professional help, with the support of a faith community that chose love over judgment, and with a determination to finally face the demons that had haunted him since childhood, Russ began to heal. He started therapy to address the emotional wounds from his past. He attended recovery meetings. He learned to be honest about his struggles instead of hiding them in shame. He discovered that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was actually the pathway to real strength. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, he began to reclaim his life. One of the most significant moments in this journey came when Russ decided to go public with his story. He released a documentary titled I Still Believe, in which he opened up about his battle with alcoholism, the pain of his childhood, and the long road to recovery. This was a risky move because the Christian music community hadn't always been kind to artists who admitted to struggling with addiction or mental health issues. There was a tendency to expect perfection, to shame those who fell short, to sweep uncomfortable truths under the rug rather than deal with them openly. But Russ refused to stay silent anymore. He knew that his story could help others who were suffering in silence, who felt alone and ashamed, who believed they were the only ones struggling, and he was right. The response to I Still Believe was overwhelming. Letters poured in from people who saw themselves in Russ's story, who had been battling their own addictions or supporting loved ones through similar struggles. Pastors reached out to thank him for his courage and to ask how they could better support people in their congregations dealing with these issues. Other artists in Christian music privately shared their own struggles and expressed gratitude that someone had finally broken the silence. Russ's honesty created a ripple effect throughout the gospel music community and beyond, opening doors for conversations that had been closed for far too long. Churches began inviting mental health professionals to speak. Support groups for addiction and recovery started forming in faith communities. Artists felt more freedom to be transparent about their own journeys. The stigma didn't disappear overnight, but it began to crack, and light started seeping into places that had been dark for too long. Today, at 75 years old, Russ Taff is a different man than he was during his years with the Gaither Vocal Band, but in many ways, he's also more himself than he's ever been. He still sings occasionally, not because he has to or because he's chasing fame, but because music is in his DNA and it's how he expresses worship and gratitude. When he performs now, there's a freedom in his voice that wasn't there before, a peace that comes from no longer having to pretend. Every note carries the weight of his journey, the pain he's walked through, the grace he's received, and the truth he's finally able to live in. His performances these days are less about perfection and more about authenticity, less about impressing an audience and more about connecting soul to soul. And people can feel the difference. There's something profoundly moving about watching a man sing who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. Russ has also become a mentor and encourager to younger artists who are facing their own struggles. He speaks at conferences, retreats, and recovery events, sharing his story with a transparency that still surprises people. He doesn't sugarcoat the hard parts or try to tie everything up in a neat bow. He talks about the mess, the failures, the moments when he wanted to give up. But he also talks about the hope, the healing, and the grace that carried him through. His message is simple but revolutionary in a culture that often demands perfection from its Christian leaders and artists. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to pretend. You can be broken and still be loved. You can struggle and still have faith. You can fall and still get back up. And your worth is not determined by your performance, your achievements, or your ability to maintain a flawless image. Your worth comes from something much deeper, much more solid, much more grace-filled than any of that. The impact of Russ's vulnerability extends far beyond just those who hear him speak. His music, both old and new, has taken on new meaning for those who now understand the context in which it was created. When fans listen to Walls of Glass or I Cry or Praise the Lord, they hear them differently now. They hear the pain behind the beauty, the struggle beneath the soaring vocals, the questions woven into the declarations of faith. These songs have become even more powerful because they're no longer just beautiful music, they're testimonies of survival, prayers from the depths, cries for help wrapped in melody. Listeners feel a deeper connection to the music because they know it was forged in the fire of real suffering and real faith wrestling with real doubt. The songs haven't changed, but their meaning has deepened, and they continue to minister to people in ways that Russ could never have imagined when he first recorded them. Russ's relationship with the Gaither Vocal Band and Bill Gaither has remained positive over the years. There have been occasional reunions and special performances where Russ joins the group on stage, and these moments are filled with warmth, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The love between them never died. It was simply waiting for the right time to be expressed again. These reunion performances are bittersweet for fans who remember the magic of Russ's time with the group, but they're also beautiful reminders that relationships can survive even the most difficult separations when they're built on a foundation of grace and understanding. Bill Gaither has spoken highly of Russ over the years, expressing admiration for his courage in facing his demons and pride in the man he's become. And Russ speaks of Bill with deep gratitude, acknowledging that Bill's support during one of the hardest times of his life meant more than words can express. Looking at Russ Taff's legacy now, it's clear that his influence extends far beyond the music charts or award shows. He has become a living example of redemption, a testament to the power of truth-telling, and a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt disqualified by their past. He represents the idea that God's grace is not reserved for those who have it all together, but is freely given to those who are honest about their brokenness. His life challenges the perfectionism that so often plagues religious communities and invites people into a more honest, more compassionate, more grace-filled way of living. The conversations he has sparked about addiction, mental health, and emotional trauma in Christian circles have had lasting impact, creating space for others to be vulnerable and seek help without fear of judgment or rejection. Tori Taff deserves recognition as well for the crucial role she played in Russ's journey. She could have left during the darkest years. Many would have understood if she had, but she stayed, fighting for their marriage, believing in the man she knew Russ could become, refusing to give up even when giving up would have been easier. Her strength, her faith, and her commitment provided the stable foundation Russ needed as he worked toward recovery. Together, they have shown what true partnership looks like, not a fairy tale romance where everything is always perfect, but a real, tested, hard-won love that chooses to stay even when things fall apart. Tori has shared her own perspective on their journey in various interviews, offering wisdom to other spouses who are supporting loved ones through addiction and mental health struggles. Her voice has added another dimension to their story, reminding us that addiction doesn't just affect the person struggling, it impacts everyone who loves them. As Russ continues to live out this chapter of his life, he does so with a focus on legacy rather than limelight. He's not interested in chasing another hit record or mounting a massive comeback tour. What matters to him now is living authentically, loving deeply, and continuing to point others toward the grace that saved his life. He wants his legacy to be more than just great music. He wants it to be a story of hope, a reminder that it's never too late to get honest, never too late to seek help, never too late to start healing. He continues to encourage others who are struggling to step out of the shadows and into the light, to stop carrying their burdens alone, to believe that they are worthy of love and help regardless of how far they've fallen or how broken they feel. The story of why Russ Taff left the Gaither Vocal Band is ultimately not a story about endings, but about new beginnings. It's not a story about failure, but about the courage to choose healing over hiding. It's not a story about weakness, but about the strength it takes to be vulnerable. When Russ made that painful decision to step away from the group, he was stepping toward wholeness, toward honesty, toward a life that honored God not through performance, but through authenticity. And in doing so, he created a legacy that is far more powerful than any he could have built by staying in the spotlight and continuing to pretend. His departure was an act of integrity that required more courage than staying ever would have. It was a declaration that his soul mattered more than his image, that his healing mattered more than his career, that truth mattered more than the applause of crowds.